Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Understories with me, your host, Lindsay Fowler. This week, we're speaking to Tom Bell, the co-founder of Freehaus, an architecture studio based in London. Freehaus's strapline is that they architect fairly to shape real lives. This mindset is found everywhere, their work, their team, their approach, and it reinforces everything they do. I've loved watching their trajectory, particularly over the last few years, as they've moved from an emerging studio to one that is highly respected within the industry. Tom and his business partner, Jonathan Hagos, have been incredibly intentional about the way that they're building the studio. But part of that has been about understanding and expressing their value as architects while remaining empathetic to their clients' needs. Tom is very open about the transition from being a hands-on architect to a business owner. He highlights the value of adding unique skills and perspectives within a larger team, and he shares insights on collaborative working and networking, while emphasizing the need to be interested in other people's goals. Freehaus, in my opinion, is a model for the future of small design studios. They are clear with what they stand for. They seek out work that is aligned with their values and their ethos, while remaining nimble and agile enough to collaborate and create impactful design work. I'm really looking forward to sharing this conversation with you, but before we get started, if you like this podcast, please give us a rating or a review wherever you're watching and listening to this. Tell a friend about it, and of course, don't forget to subscribe so that you get notified about future episodes, which come out every Tuesday. And now, over to Tom. Tom Bell, it's delightful to have you on the pod. So thank you so much for coming. For those people who don't know about Freehaus, can you tell us a little bit about the studio?
Thanks for having us. Freehaus. So we, our strapline, our USP, our tagline, and our ethos is really we architect fairly to shape real lives. And there's a lot wrapped up in that, really. First off, architecting as a verb. So we're trying to reclaim the idea of architecture as a noun. Something, sorry, not as a noun, as a verb. Something that's better done as an action.
Yeah.
So really looking at the outputs we can have, what we can achieve, what we can do with people. Fairly to shape real lives is obviously we really enjoy working with end user clients. We work a lot in the public sector, doing it with charities, school, education, that sort of thing. And in terms of the name Freehaus as well, the idea is that we don't have a house style. We enjoy a journey of discovery on a project with our clients, and really enjoy providing authorship and agency to both our employees and our clients and end users as well within that journey of creating a built form.
That line, to architect fairly to shape real lives, is that something that is really permeates throughout the studio, so that it's not just something that you put out into this sort of as a marketing speak. It's actually something that your people ingest as well, and they take that into consideration when they're doing the work with you guys.
Yeah, I think architecting fairly is both. It sort of sets a moral compass, but I think it also sets a sense of fairness within the organisation and the group, the team. So people have a voice. John and I always say, there's no back of house. We always want people to be front facing, interacting with clients, not just doing the same thing over and over again. We're also a member of the LPF, which again has its the London Practice Forum, which has its own code and ethos, which shares those values as well. So we're trying to, within our own umbrella and within that sort of wider group, trying to push a better platform for architecture, one that's a bit more responsible, one that goes beyond the bare minimum of standards. So whether that's London Living Wage or making sure people have access to good health and well-being, HR facilities, that sort of thing. We're trying to make the idea that the workplace is not just where you go every day. It should be something that's benefiting you and improving your life as well. At least that's our aim.
And I mean, obviously, I mean, I think as most practices start out, they don't start out with these kind of ideals. As they start out trying to figure out how to get work. They sort of, it's a bit scrappy in the beginning. But for you and John, was that, when did that sort of transition happen?
Well, I think actually we had a vision of what we wanted to do when we started. We'd both come
Did
from,
you?
yeah, I think we both come from practices where the work that we'd really enjoyed the most was civic facing or neighborly or neighborhoodly. I'd done an awful lot through education at Wilkinson Air, and those sorts of projects were projects that sort of provided a great sense of satisfaction because you knew that the architecture you were building, as it were, or generating was going to be there for a sustained period of time and actually have a benefit to the end users that would use it. Something quite different to, say, spec office. So we had these ideals, and when we formed Freehaus, we actually had two projects that were civic focused. We had an Eritrean community centre, which was attached to a church that was providing.
Oh, the African Centre. Yeah, that's right.
Not
yeah.
the African. It was the Eritrean.
Oh, it's a different one.
Yeah, which was doing art school classes as well for young people, and
amazing
English classes and things like that. So it was exploring how communities were built around refugees, the status coming from Eritrea and that sort of thing. And then the other project we had, which was the Clement James Centre, which again is a sort of multi-generational adult learning centre in West Kensington, which we're still working on and have been for 10 years. So we had these projects, but they're incredibly slow. And so you don't have this instant portfolio. You have to build it through, that, as I was talking about recently, that sort of power of free in a way, where we were doing other things, where we'd do go knock on doors and try and get preferred bidder status for councils and things like that. So we were building that ideal, but we couldn't run a business on that alone. We had to run a business on other projects. So we also came to the table with a number of F&B projects. So our sort of starting point was F&B with the desire to get back into these sort of civic facing projects.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And so you mentioned that you and John both started, you guys decided to start Freehaus with the same ideals, but what was the catalyst for starting the studio? How did you decide to take the plunge and do your own thing?
I had always wanted to run my own studio. I think it's fair to say. My education has sort of sent me through large practice, seeing how that works and operates and the efficiencies of that. But in doing that, I also was aware that I wasn't then going to be able to see some of the mechanics of running a business or behind the scenes in terms of the management style structures. So I did 6 years at Wilkinson Air, qualified there, and then purposely moved to a smaller practice where I became a director. And with the express purpose of trying to understand both sides of the coin, as it were, and I spent 6 years there as well. And after those sort of 12 years of experience, I felt equipped then to be able to take the best of both, as it were, and start something. And knew John, known John for a very long time. We have fond memories of seeing one another at the Bartlett when we were both there. John was doing his undergraduate and I was doing my postgraduate. John was the keeper of zip drives in the computer room, so I used to see him. And then we worked together at the practice I was at before starting Freehaus. So we'd worked up a very good, trusted relationship, and could see that John had and shared the same ideals and ethos and values as I did. So it seemed like a natural fit.
I mean, we've talked about this before in the past, but that importance of having shared values. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, I think what's lovely about our relationship is we have become friends through shared values, through shared professional values, as it were. And our relationship has always been founded on a professional basis, which encourages the best in each other, I think. We're able to have some challenging conversations, and we're also able to see the other person's point of view, but fundamentally, having the same values, despite having very different upbringings, has enabled us to forge a really lovely path forward, actually.
So you guys have been going, is it 14 years now? Is that right?
Gosh, no, not quite. We have been going 12. This is our 12th year.
12th year, that's right. And I remember when we first met, you were talking about how, it was only in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, you guys were always considered sort of an emerging practice. And now you're kind of coming out of that other side where you're kind of more established in that sense. Does the relationship with you and John, has that, because I think, the founder relationship is so unique in a lot of ways. I mean, in some ways it's like a marriage too. It's, you have to really trust each other. You have to really know each other. You have to be comfortable having, as you say, having those hard conversations. Now that you guys have been going for a little bit longer, how has that relationship changed? Do you guys share the same vision for the future? Do you talk about the sort of what you guys are wanting out of the business? How does that shaping?
Yeah, I think the business, we're 50-50 equity partners in the business. That I think is really important.
Yeah.
It gives us parity. And I think as long we talk a lot about parity and maintaining parity, but that doesn't necessarily always mean the same thing. John lives in London. I do not. I travel to London. So we have different commutes, we have different working patterns. We've both got families of a similar age, so we've echoed each other's sort of personal lives in a way, so we have an understanding of what the other is experiencing. But yeah, I think we're very keen that obviously in the early days of a company, there's a lot of outgoings. So sadly, you don't always get paid first. You often get paid last. So you have to make the business work for you in as many other ways as it can, whether that's time with your growing family, paternity leave. I think those are the sorts of things where the entity Freehaus can give to you. And again, as long as you maintain parity, I think that's the main thing.
How does the parity show up for the team then? How do they see that unfolding within the business itself?
I think we again, I think it's a bit like parenting, dare I say it. I think we have to have a common voice. I think we might not always agree totally with the direction, or we might have a slightly different emphasis on priority. But ultimately, you have to sort of have those conversations and say, right, that's fine. Okay, we'll do it that way, and we'll try it. So I think the team hopefully has a constant approach from both John and I. We also practically sit in on everybody's reviews together. We'll always be together when we do Monday meetings and resourcing. So there's no sort of land grab for time or people's hours. And then I think the other thing that we're trying to do now as we've grown is prevent silos building. So giving more agency to senior architects and architects to do the things that we were doing, like resourcing or project leading, that could in effect sort of start to divide you, because John's off here doing his thing, Tom's off here doing his thing, and do those two people sort of meet, or do you sort of start to generate different styles? So by sort of sitting back a little bit and handing over to senior architect level, you can maintain that consistency. And John and I are moving more into a design review space, where effectively we would both sit in on each project and review all of the projects rather than leading a particular one. So there's always a crossover. At least that's something that we're trying to establish more at the moment. It's definitely in our business plan going forward for this year.
How have you found that? I mean, I think there's so much, and I'm sure we talked about this before, about that transition from being an architect to being a founder and then to being a business owner. I mean, has it been a challenge to move beyond doing all the things or having responsibility, well, control of all the things, I should say, responsibility you still have because it's your business. But how have you found that the transition between being so hands-on and moving to something that's so hands-off?
It's not an easy one.
Well, not so hands-off. But you know what I mean.
It's not an easy transition, and it's obviously not a linear process. So you'll have cycles where things are going well, so you can sit back a little bit more, and people are taking responsibility. A project going well, and then you might have that sort of perfect storm when a project needs a bit more of your time, and somebody might be ill, or there are other sort of forces at play. So yeah, it is a challenge, but I think that's what you sort of heard me mention, the business plan. I think that's really important. We set out our business plan, we try to achieve our goals each year, and little by little we do actually.
Oh yeah, because you guys. Yeah, I was gonna say, because you do the thing where you meet up in the beginning of January, don't you? And you do. Did you say you do a high level planning? You do the high level sort of vision stuff one day, and then you do the practicalities the next day. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, we always meet up at the end of the financial year. We'll meet up twice. We'll meet up once, and both for full days outside the office, where we can just talk and use and review. So the first day is definitely a reflection day. It's like what happened. This is what we set out to achieve, but actually what really happened. And it's also really interesting sort of seeing that and sort of getting behind the numbers and the profitability on things, because it's never quite as you imagined it was. So it's interesting to sort of try and get rid of some of these clouded judgments or bias, as it were, and lay it bare. And then from that, we're much more able to build for the next year and plug the gaps and set a direction. But we wouldn't do that in the same day. It's just too tiring. So we'd take stock.
Yeah.
And typically we'd write down what our approach to the year would be, and then we'd meet up and we'd both discuss our approach that we want to see happen. And remarkably, we're remarkably similar in our points. I can't remember a time over 13 years where we've been pulling in opposite directions, which is also quite nice. It's that sort of sense that if you step out of the room and you write things down individually and you bring them back together, the essence of Freehaus is still very aligned. And then we spend that day working out how we can deliver on those requirements and what we can budget for HR, what we can budget for accountancy, or is this year one where we have to do a big push into BIM and look at that more rigorously, or is the website ready for another review, another update? There's always something that we need to sort of prioritize, both from the business point of view and from a point of view of sort of what work do we need to win, where are we going, what is the next crank on the gear, as it were, to take what we're doing into a new space. So this year we've been targeting multiple unit residential projects, and we've had we've nearly been successful on a few occasions, and I think we'll probably do it before the end of the year. We've got enough sort of pipeline leads there, but it's a very considered move and something that requires
Mm.
a continual review of. And the reason we've wanted to do that is that obviously we are, as you say, well known for our more mixed use ground floor level placemaking, but we need to really start to combine that with larger workplace or larger residential sector projects. So it's a natural progression. But it's interesting that we haven't come through, because I mentioned earlier, we came through sort of the F&B routes. We haven't come through your traditional extensions or small scale residential.
No.
We purposely avoided that at the beginning, and now we're kind of having to try and plot a route to sort of capture the social housing side of things.
It's really interesting listening to you talk about this, because I think, there is such a range of work that you guys do. And I think sometimes sort of the more generalist practice would be able to, they would have this sort of mix of portfolio. But I think with you guys, it's really interesting because you create a consistency around this idea about architecting fairly to shape real lives. Can you talk more about how that translates, not just necessarily into, we just do civic projects. It's like, oh no, when we work with a private client, we take this approach. How does that sort of core nucleus of a message infiltrate into different sort of approaches around different types of clients? It's quite a complicated question.
No, I think we devote an awful lot of time to brief writing and understanding who our clients are, and often we're presented with the client that isn't really the client, and we need to spend time finding who the real people are that we're designing for and listening to what they have to say. So there's a lot of unheard voices. We spend a lot of time at the front doing that. I think that we approach, as I say, we don't have a house style, so we're approaching our projects through a methodology. And some clients actually really buy into that, because again, it means that we're not presenting a fait accompli of a design before we've actually really talked to anybody. So there's a sort of sincerity there and an empathy that I think we bring, and a humility, I think, to architecture that we bring to our clients and the end users, to give them space and a voice to shape a project. And I think that is echoed in the way we deliver our work. So we'd always want to have, for years now, we've been saying that we must do some sort of social value through the project, whether that's recording unheard stories or local histories, or finding local students to be design ambassadors for the project. When we've been working with the school, we've had a youth group who are the Eco Schools group, vetting our environmental principles. So they're going to sort of effectively building stewards when it's built, to make sure that it's actually run as it should. So there's always some way that we're trying to deliver on that wider responsibility, and I think that comes through. It's looking beyond the red line boundary, really. Beyond the red line, your building doesn't start and finish at that boundary. Your building's not going to be successful if you open the door and you haven't told anybody about what you've been doing for the last year, and you expect people to come to you. You've really got to start that journey as you start the brief and build trust, and find those people that can bring prosperity to the project and give it legacy and life beyond opening the front door. So we focus very much on those things. All our designs are very different for that reason, I think. We also have an intrigue, in terms of detail, materiality, light, texture, thresholds, a welcome. How do you transition through a building? How do you make somebody feel like they could own that space? So there are more detailed sort of sinews to that sort of thread, but effectively it's leading with this this idea that we don't have a house star, but we do follow a sort of approach methodology that is inclusive.
I think there's something really strong about this. Would you say then, what would be the between an inquiry for a client and between that and actually coming up with a sort of a final brief, sort of stage 1 level sign off? What's the sort of time period for that? Because I mean, I've seen a lot of people that move from like stage 0-1 into 2 within a matter of weeks. Do you guys take a longer process with that?
Well, I think we have those same contracts with the clients are not recognizing the value of those early stages. Far too often, projects are started at RF stage 2 for some reason. I don't quite understand why. It saves a few pennies. It doesn't really benefit the project. So that's a hard position to be in for any architect. And I think some clients do allow us to go back and redo stages with the Africa Centre. One of our recent successes, we went back and we said, no, we can't start here. We need to go back and start from the beginning. And they were on board with that. Other clients aren't, but you have to then bring the brief through. I mean, the brief really isn't finished, is it, until you complete the project. We try to be as accommodating as we can throughout the stages. And I think that's a skill, actually, to not fret too much that the brief isn't tied down and give it a chance to develop, and trust your own skill sets and your team to be able to make and accommodate those needs within, it's within their technical capabilities, even, on site or at stage 4. Keeping that brief live throughout the process is really, really important. And I think you don't know everybody up front. You're not, even when you've done a good stage 1 or 2, stage 1 or brief writing, you soon realise that you're not actually the expert of the local area. Somebody sitting on the other side of the table, or a community leader, would be somebody who's sort of lived and breathed that brief for years and years. So you just need to tap into it. But I think it's trying to either go back and do it, or hold that door open for brief change as you progress, and trusting yourself.
How does that affect? Yeah, I understand what you mean, because it allows some sort of allows more of a conversation between you and the client as the process goes along, right? And that's key stakeholders, I suppose, in some of the work that you guys do. But then how does that impact it from a sort of I hate the word, but from an efficiency point of view? Because are there boundaries around the element, the amount of brief adaptation that happens throughout the stages of projects?
Yes, no. I think there's an efficiency to it, isn't there? I think the key is communication. I think what you have to do is not sit in a defensive architectural position where you become the naysayer. Say you can't. Actually, we've found clients that do want to change the brief at stage 4, and that's perfectly okay. But it will cost you more money. It won't be efficient. But is that a choice you want to make? Do you understand the challenges that presents? If it's a yes and I still want to do it, then who are we to say no? And I think far too often architects start to become defensive because we can't change it now, and we need to stick to this, and the time for that was then, and but again, it's like these often clients are lay, and it takes them time to understand the decisions they're making. Takes them time to realise that decisions need to be made quite early on and not late on. But we have, I still feel like we have a duty there to continue to listen throughout the design stages, and then set out, very clearly the choices and the consequences of doing what they're doing. But for a lot of clients, the late change is really worth it because it's going to add something that they would other not have. So it's allowing value, really. And I think ultimately clients, that's what they're after. Not always a building that's on budget, on time. They also want a building that's going to work and have legacy. And equally, if they want more partway through and are willing to pay for more, that building is effectively still on budget. So I think you've got to work with your clients.
I think that's it, isn't it? They have to be willing to pay for it. I think that's the thing, right?
But equally, you say to them, it's like, that's all very well and good, but then you can't afford to pay for that. Okay, so you can't have it. So what could we do that might allow some of those things? Or, we're still here.
This is where I get stuck with this. Yeah. Well, this is where I get stuck with this because, if the brief writing process, well, yeah, I agree. It should be kept throughout the sort of making sure that it's always being considered along the journey. But what happens if they do get to that point and then because the brief process wasn't as maybe clearly defined at the early stages, they get to stage 4 and they realize they need to change the brief, but they can't afford it. That ends up putting it in a sort of a really tricky position. It's like, yeah, you can be strategic and think, well, what can we do? But wouldn't it be more interesting and more beneficial for people to start in that brief period and, slow it down?
We do try and do that as well. Yeah, I mean, we obviously we try to make sure people are informed at the front.
I know that clients are like, no, I want this done by this date. I get that, but it is a challenge, right?
The clients are, we're providing a service, and I think you have to maintain that service. And part of that service is informing your client of what the consequences are to their decision-making process. And that they're happy to make those decisions as long as they're informed. I think we all understand that we can't have everything we want, and we will have to prioritize certain things. But to not be given choice is kind of unacceptable. And that's where I think architects have to be more open-minded to late change, to be flexible, to trust their skill sets. And again, see what the value is to the client. It may not be a shadow detail. They may place more emphasis on. We've had projects where actually just putting in a couple of extra doors meant that they could use an area of the conference room for a back of stage, and suddenly it opens it up from just a conference facility to an AmDram facility that's used for karate and something else. So you've got to keep your ears open to what those things are. I think it doesn't always have to be expensive.
No, exactly. I guess I always think about it. It comes down to what are the outcomes that the client's looking for. I had a client once say to me that their clients aren't buying, residential refit. They're actually buying the champagne with their friends in their new kitchen at the end of it. And it's like how to work backwards from that sort of end goal in a way that's beneficial for you, but also that it actually gets the client where they want to get to. And I think it's also that empathy that you were talking about, is understanding that journey that they're trying to get to and being, lining yourself with them on that. I think it is a challenge though, when clients are like, oh, I want to get in, Yeah,
you've got to sit yourself and side by side your clients or your end users. You've got to, as you say, you've got to empathize and understand how they're going to use that space. And at different times of their lives as well. Put yourself in their shoes.
It must be an interesting one. I just follow my train of thought here. But if you're doing some civic projects, you talk about the doors that you use that created like a much more dynamic space for the end users. When it comes to residential, how does that translate into a residential home? I mean, I'm assuming you're working with people who want these to be forever homes or homes that they're planning on staying in for a long time. Is there an approach to the design that evolves as they evolve within their home?
I think that one of the things we constantly, doesn't matter whether it's residential or civic or commercial, is this sense of welcome, this sense of threshold between space. How can you make something special, the in-between space special. Whether that's about how spaces connect with each other, or whether there's a generosity to the circulation to accommodate a pushchair or a wheelchair or a desk for homework. There's every inch of the space has to have a purpose, and you kind of got to look at that space from different times of the day as well. So I'm sitting in my cupboard here. Sorry, it's very dark, but the doors pull out and they close at 6 o'clock when the kids come home and have tea on the table behind. So it's an office now, but the same space is a home, and it's not fair for my office space to be in my home with my children. That's not giving them the quality of space they need. But simple things like doors that slide or move, and really thinking about storage, all those, especially in places like London where you need you've got to be really efficient with everything to get the most out. That for me is thinking about it, but also thinking about now, the lifelong home, so important. The idea that mortgages cost a lot of money. Mortgages are extending in duration. Moving is expensive. Your family is growing. So how can these spaces sort of work for your whole life journey, as it were?
It's really interesting. What does the future hold for Freehaus then? You and John are due to have your sort of January catch up soon. So what's the future hold? Do you think?
We've just had. We actually hold it in sort of August, because our.
Oh, do you?
Well, only
your financial year. You're saying
our financial year runs from August to July, and we actually chose that because John and I love doing tax returns, so that way we get to constantly do tax return in all months of the year. But so we're kind of moving into, we're kind of coming into our quarter, sort of halfway, sort of a third of the way through the year. So it'll be interesting to see where we get to by December. But things are looking positive, really positive. I think we're, as you say, we're becoming more established in what we do. We're refining what we do in terms of in our comfort zone. But we would like to push into doing some more residential, and we also need to start to talk more conversantly with private sector clients that also need some of our softer skills, I think, around placemaking and community as well. And that I think John and I are realising it requires a slightly different different set of skills that we're developing as we go.
Can you say a bit more about that, and how what that looks like from a practical point of view? How are you reaching out to these private sector?
A lot of people. Well, we are being invited, which is lovely. So I think we're reaching out through our Built Work awards, recognition in the AJ ran a lovely article for us recently on 15 pages of the AJ, which is unheard of.
Wow!
So there's a lot of marketing that we do, and we also give agency to people within our team to do social. But I think we're also on frameworks, which is helping, and collaboration with other architects. So we are constantly pitching and bidding for work with larger practices who often have the relationships with the private developer or housing group or trust that can make a introduction for us as well. And I think that's proving very effective. So often with larger.
How did you get in with the? Sorry, go ahead. I talked over you. Go ahead.
No, no, no. Well, I just think that the procurement of larger plots and estates and things like that require, there's a requirement, isn't there? I think within the London Plan and from the GLA and central government to be more inclusive, to have better variety, and you can't do that necessarily with one architect cookie cutting. What was your next question, Lindsay?
Oh, I was wondering, how did you forge the relationships with the bigger practices in order to joint bid for things? How did that come about? Because we talked about this a bit during guerrilla tactics and how that was a sort of there's a special position that a smaller practice can hold by working with the bigger practice, because they can bring a sort of an agility, a dynamism that maybe a slightly larger beast doesn't have. But how did you make that relationship in the first place? How did that come about?
I think it's come about. We were invited to DSDHA. I think was the first place we were invited. And said, come and have a coffee, and love to hear a bit more about what you do. And I can't for the life of me remember why or what project they'd seen that they were interested in. But that sort of was a really sort of eye-opening moment for John and I. And we were like, oh, somebody's interested in talking to us. And we thought, well, nobody's talking to us. But how wrong we were. And I think we then braved it. We were then saying, well, okay, well, let's look at the framework. Who's on frameworks? Who's on frameworks that are delivering the sort of projects where we might be able to add some value? And let's just go and talk to them. What's the harm in ringing them up? And that sort of snowballed a bit. And then, and as I say, another sort of avenue through the LPF, we get to know people. That sense is sort of just humanity, really. I think it's you don't need to be remembered for your architecture. You just need to be remembered for who you are, really, and have just have a conversation and have an interest in shaping something. And we got a lot of opportunities then to bid with larger organisations. So I think first we did was with DSDHA, and then we were bidding on something with them and Morrison Company, and then we were bidding on something with Donald Insall, and then we were bidding on something with Studio E Great West, and suddenly you start to see this enormous platform. And I think at the same time, John was obviously a 40 under 40 winner, so I'm a little bit older, so I couldn't go there. But that also helped at the same time identify us as a small practice of perhaps some merit. And I think you just have to work through those bids, and the bidding process is an incredibly good networking process. It's an incredibly good knowledge share platform. And you have to perform. But actually everybody should be trying it, because I think the expectations aren't so high either. There's the architecture community, I think, is very welcoming in the sense of small practice. Of course, you don't have large scale, residential master plan. You're a small practice, but you do have such and such, and in able to sort of piece those teams together, you start to realize your value. And I think you can give yourself agency as well. John is a conservation registrant, which always helps when we're talking about listed buildings and sites. Not every architecture practice has one, unless you're Donald Insall or Purcell. So that's really helpful. I'm a Passivhaus.
You're Passivhaus, aren't you? Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah.
So again, just that environmental sensitivity. There are more and more Passivhaus certified designers now, but I think again it gives you a little bit of technical knowledge that others might not have. I'm also a RBA client advisor. So when it comes to pitching and saying, right, well, you're going to a client advisor role, do you have any experience of that? Having a certificate is really useful. These things
Mm.
are very easy to mark. So there's a lot of things you can do, I think, to give yourself value within a larger team. Don't always assume that a larger architect has all of these things in-house. And I think the idea of being a disruptor or finding those architects that are willing to be challenged from a scale point of view. And I think, I'd hold Morrison Company up here as a leading example. The idea that you become a super team, and you can be 100% focused at every scale, whether it's the small scale or the large scale. And you can only do that really with this sort of breadth of team. So have a go. Yeah, I think it's a really good way forward. It was interesting because it's a process that's echoed our early days when we were doing F&B, which we don't really talk about much anymore. But we were doing a lot of F&B where we were working for people on the high street, people like say Benugos or whatever. But they'd be introducing us to clients. So they'd be introducing us to the V&A. They'd be introducing us to the Natural History Museum. So again, it's that sort of collaborative working platform that's sort of evolved perhaps to help work and generate project leads or just simple marketing really.
Yeah. I mean, it's, as I say, people buy from other people, but I think it's the value that you bring alongside that is what really sort of sets you apart. So as you say, it's like, just being an interesting person and being interested in in what the goals of the client, or what the sort of your colleague up the road or what they're doing, it makes such a difference in sort of how projects can move forward. It's just a different, it's more collaborative, isn't it? It's less about like, oh, this is my vision, this is what I'm trying to do. It's more like, what can we build together?
Yeah, we had a lovely collaboration with Sarah recently. It was an unsuccessful one, but the idea of them doing master planning and us doing a common plan and actually us meshing that together to create something that was unique. You can only do that with two perspectives, as it were, and ours are very different. But I think the other thing is, it comes back to that very first question you asked me. We architect fairly to shape real lives. You've got to understand who you are and what you do to collaborate. You need to be very cognizant and communicative about what you do to be able to express what your value is. So I think you've got to sort of work on that side at the same time as the networking and the pitching. But pitching is you learn an awful lot about how to answer questions and what's current and what people are looking for, and I think that's really, really important for us. That it keeps us fresh.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to sort of put a pin. Just for fun, we have quick fire at the end. I'll give you 3. I've got a variety just to sort of see. No preparation required. If Freehaus had a mascot, what would it be?
Oh no, what would it be if we had a mascot? Oh no, what would we have if we had a mascot? It's really bad. I can't. John would kill me for saying it. It's probably my dog. But dogs should never enter the professional world, really, or never be talked about anyway. But Woody, our dog, does.
No, I disagree.
Does hang around a little bit. He's got his own high-vis vest and stuff, so he's pretty safe on site. But yeah, he's pretty good. He makes people smile.
I love it. He's
good at shredding.
Yeah,
well.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
he's shredding.
If you've got any confidential papers, you give them to Woody and he'll sort that out for you.
Oh, good at shredding. I thought you said he was shedding. I was like, okay, well, that's kind of a bit more annoying. But
no.
What architect or architecture studio do you most admire and why?
Oh, interesting. I think that's an interesting one. We admire lots of architects. It's a cop-out, isn't it? But I think we do admire Morrison Company for all the the opportunity they've provided us and the nurturing they've given us through winning an open competition, where we had some value as well. But they've been incredibly supportive to us. They also have an attention to design that's inspiring, actually, and we'd like to emulate that. I think other practices, we're always embroiled in pitching against people like IFTU, and we don't always win. So we admire our direct competition, I think, as well. We admire
there's something very healthy about that, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And we have chats every time we meet up on a site walk around before doing a
pitch.
Yeah, or when we meet up at the LPF, and actually we did have a good conversation. Why don't we just collaborate? We should just work together. So we admire our local, our local competitors, and then we really admire other people who just have a precision 6A, proficiency detailing, Gibson Thornley. So there's a wide range.
There's a lot of talent out there, isn't there? Just incredible skill set and incredible thinking. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Last question: form or function?
Form or function? Function. Yeah,
function.
I think in the sense of functioning as an end user experience. Architecture for us I think is, I'm speaking for John here, but for me, is a vessel. It's a vessel for living. So it kind of has to function. If it doesn't function, it's without people. And without people, architecture doesn't really have much sway. So I think for me, function, but it should definitely have form as well. Otherwise, you're not doing your job well enough.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to leave it on that note. Tom, this has been so interesting. Thank you so much for being so open about Freehaus. And I've been such an admirer of your guys' work for such a long time. So it's been so great getting to know you and John. I mean, I've known John for a little while, but it's it's been so wonderful. So thank you so much for coming on.
Such a pleasure. Yeah, thank you. No problem.
Thanks again to Tom for his openness and thoughtful conversation with me. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please like and subscribe, share with a friend, all those sorts of things. Episodes drop every Tuesday. Until then, be well. Understories was produced by Cloudfields and Kieran Fowler. The music is by Avis, and the branding is by the lovely Joe Jones. See you next week.